Good morning. Be seated. So, this morning I want to ask you some questions, and then I want to share some stories with you, and then ask you a few more questions. But don't worry, you don't have to answer them out loud. So, love your neighbor. Sounds easy when we say those words. But those are really strong words, love your neighbor. As I witnessed Thursday night, when I went to the Planning Commission at Walnut Creek to petition for a conditional use permit for a new temporary site for Trinity Center. And thank you for those who wrote letters in support. Thank you to those who came and stood with me, because without you, I cannot do what I do. And your support is really important. But I heard some very difficult things to hear from the community in which we live. I was astounded by the fear and the loathing and I've known that not in my backyard exists, but boy, it came out in force Thursday night. And I'm so happy that it was balanced. It was balanced by love and compassion. But still, love your neighbor is a difficult thing to do, don't you think? And what does it really mean to love your neighbor? Does it mean you need to be in love with your neighbor? Does it mean that you care for your neighbor? Excuse me. That's all I could remember. And who is your neighbor? Is it the person or persons that live next to you or down the street? Someone you work with, go to church with, someone sitting next to you today? What if you don't like your neighbor? That hasn't happened, has it? Do you have to pretend to live into these words, or simply do no harm? And those words about justice, what does justice mean? Does it mean, as in the Old Testament, eye for eye? Or does it mean that everyone has enough? Enough food, enough medical care, enough housing? And what about charity? Is charity the same as justice? If you are charitable, does it mean you have to give everything you have so that others have enough? Or does it mean that you share in your abundance whatever you feel called to give, or however much you can? These are powerful messages, and they bring more questions sometimes than answers. So love, justice, charity, and neighbor. Hold on to those thoughts while I share with you some stories about the neighbors we as members of this church community and the community at large offer. Charity, justice, and love. I'm speaking about the members of Trinity Center. As you know, our mission is to serve people experiencing homelessness and those at risk of being homeless. We provide 2 meals a day, clothing, showers, laundry, a place to get their mail, and case management. And in the winter, overnight shelter. But we are more than that. We are a lifeline. For people like Bob. Bob lives in the creek, Walnut Creek, on the creek. His home is a camp under a bridge on the creek. He would not have it any other way. He earns money by playing his guitar in restaurants and small gigs. He comes to Trinity for food, clothing, and showers. Bob is one of the chronic homeless. We love him by accepting who he is. He's actually got quite a good sense of humor. Sometimes it's because he's a little high, and he's looking forward to legalized marijuana. But we embrace him. That's who he is, and he would harm no one. Jack lives outside around Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill, Lafayette, wherever he can lay his head. He's chronic alcoholic, and most likely he will die on the street one day. He's been in detox and rehab more times than we can count. but we support him in his efforts to become sober. He's an amiable man, often taken advantage of on the street because of his easygoing nature. He comes to the center and when sober comes into the winter shelter. And we're his family, and we love him, and we laugh with him. And sometimes we scold him, especially Carol, as we would scold any one of our family members that is clearly harming themselves with drugs or alcohol. Mike is technically homeless. He house sits, he stays with friends and family. In between jobs, he comes to the center. He's a friend to all the members and often takes newly homeless under his wing and helps them navigate the streets and to be safe. It's a scary place. Richard goes from shelter to shelter in the county. He's an elderly man with health problems. Everyone in social services knows him. He makes the rounds. He has an amazing past as a cartoonist, and he's a local history buff. He can tell you all there is to know about San Francisco, Berkeley, Walnut Creek. He loves movies, and when he comes into the winter shelter, he goes to the library and he picks out movies, no violence, no sex, for the members to watch at the overnight shelter. We've been working with him to reunite him with his family. I believe they're in Arkansas. He wants to be here, and we're trying to help him see this is not the best place for him to be. Jeff and Love. You may have seen a pit bull being carted around with a little bicycle cart. She wears goggles sometimes. She's the kindest, sweetest dog I've ever known. And we began building a relationship with her owner. His name is Jeff. And we started that. He came to us. He was a little bit scary, smelled bad, looked horribly dirty, looked a little edgy. But we started caring for his dog, and we were able to get her to a vet, buy the medications, and he repays us week at a time. And now he's working to get clean. He looks just like you and I, and he now has a job at PetSmart. He doesn't make much money, and not enough for housing, but he's happy because he can better care for his dog. And then there's Sam. She came to us with her little dog last winter. She was living in her car and she was undergoing chemo at the time. We helped her by getting an extension to her housing voucher, what had expired, and through a connection at the winter shelter, she came in, and through that connection, she found an apartment. And soon after, her cancer went into remission. I've heard recently that it has returned. However, she's had a year in an apartment with her dog off the street. And Leslie and Mushka. I'm sure many of you have seen Leslie and Mushka, little ankle biter dog that he is. They can be seen Sunday mornings working here in the kitchen after coffee hour, working our events. She comes to church sometimes. She works part-time for Trinity Center, and she's one of the hardest workers we have. We helped her get her birth certificate that she needed in order to get into program. You have to have an identity. She didn't have a birth certificate with her maiden name on it because she had been married and divorced, lived in several different states, couldn't find a way to get that. Imagine, ladies, if you are married and you divorce and you don't get put into that divorce decree that you have the right to use your maiden name, you cannot use it. And so we had to go to the court to petition for her to use her maiden name. I was appalled. I didn't know that. In any case, she has it. And now we're working with her to reunite her with her family. They want her to come, but she's connected here. I have come to love her, and I will truly miss her, but I will rejoice when she returns to Illinois. Each of our members have a story. Each have hopes and dreams. Each have life struggles that we support with love and care. Each is worth loving. That's that love your neighbor. There are more stories than I can tell you today. To hear more, I invite you to be part of this ministry and hear the stories for yourself from their mouths, not mine. But I want to go back to some of those questions right now and ask again, what does it mean to love your neighbor? One way might be being a listening ear to a homeless person. It means more than you can imagine that someone would listen to you and spend the time with you. They're often ignored and asked to move along. But I wonder, what about that justice thing? Are we doing enough to help bring them justice? And by that I mean enough food, enough medical care, enough housing. Are we sharing in our abundance? How much more can we help? And a few more questions. Like I said, you don't have to answer any of them to me. Is Trinity Center an outreach ministry of St. Paul's, or is it a tenant of the Fellowship House? I'm often asked this by members of our community at large, and my response is, yes, it is a ministry of St. Paul's. It's an outreach ministry. Yes, we have a separate tax ID and we're a certified nonprofit, but that was done so that we could accept public and private funding and separate any of those funds from our church operating expenses. Trinity Center was born here and will be here for some time to come. St. Paul's Commons was sparked by Trinity Center. Without Trinity Center, there would be no St. Paul's Commons. And it will house the program for a minimum of 5 years after completion. And St. Paul's Commons will provide housing for 44 units, but maybe there could be couples, maybe a family with one child because they're a studio and one bedroom apartment. So maybe 90 or 100 people. That's a lot of people that need housing in this community. Those will be people that are now off the street. The community of Walnut Creek sees the members of St. Paul's as leaders. A community strong in faith, love, and charity, and a community that seeks justice for all. So how do you see yourself at St. Paul's? There are many ways you can love your neighbor. I'm just giving you a few ideas. Please consider how you can help at Trinity Center, how you can learn more about the people who need your help. Read our newsletter for more ways. Talk to me. I'm always around. And so, to close, I pray that God will continue to challenge us to love our neighbor, and that we will hear the call, and we will answer it as best we can. Amen.